In this video, we're going to cover exactly what custom shapes are and how you're able to use them in your rigs. When rigging, you may choose to give your bones a certain look. This is usually necessary on larger rigs where having many various sized bones can actually look confusing. Custom shapes essentially allow you to take an object that you've created or you've modelled and you can use it as basically a custom shape for a bone. Okay, so in this lecture we have Suzanne and we have the two bones as normal, but one of the bones has been replaced by this custom shape here. It's like a half moon circle kind of thing, but essentially it works exactly as, well, basically exactly the same. So that's basically what I'm going to cover in this lecture. Nice and straightforward, nice and simple. The start file is the Suzanne weightpaint.blend. Okay, so this is the file that we finished off previously. So you've got the two bones that have been weight painted and you've got the Suzanne in the center there as well, subsurfed and shade smooth. That's not too important right now. Now the first thing I want to make a note of is basically the direction or the angle of the bones, because this is going to become increasingly important the more you understand about armatures and rigging. So if you click on the armature settings panel here and click on viewport display, you're looking for this switch here, axes. If you enable that checkbox, you'll notice that each bone in your rig has now got the axes displayed. So you have the x-axis, the z-axis, and then hidden there you've got the y-axis as well. A newer feature is you can actually position this. So on older versions of Blender, it was always at the tail end of the bone, so you may choose to stick it there as well. So if you're used to that, like I am, for example, I'll just probably have it set to 1 there as such. Now, a bone angle, or the bone roll, if you like, is always around the y-axis here. So you're looking at this. Now, I'm not going to go too in-depth about this just yet, because I want to go over that during the constraints section, I think. But what's important to understand at the moment is that the custom shapes always take on a Zulu axis here. So even though your objects, if you know from like when you're modeling things in Blender generally, the Zulu axis generally always points up. If I get the right shortcut for my tools, just bear with me. So that's the normal, that's the Zulu axis there as such. Now, if you have a look here at the y-axis here, it's actually facing the upwards angle. So instead of the Z, it's actually the Y. It's always been like this in Blender. Well, that's just something that you need to bear in mind. So whilst you're modeling something one way, generally what's going to happen is it's going to flip 90 degrees. So, okay, so let's just keep this simple then. Let's just add something very simple, like, I don't know, just a simple plane. So the way I generally do this is I always put the cursor to the side of the model somewhere, just as you do in this. Go into object mode if it's necessary. I'll just click on Suzanne either way. Just make sure that you're basically in object mode and just basically add new objects, same as you normally would in Blender. So we have a plane here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to scale this down here, and I'm just going to scale it down a little bit on this axis as well, the y-axis, and then just extrude this back out as well. So you create like a little sort of boomerang-like thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to extrude these one more time towards the sort of left a little bit like that as well. So this is now the object here. So what you could do is if you click on the bone in question here, the ear left bone, if you go to the bone display panel here, click on the viewport display and you get these options: custom objects, the scale, and the override transform. For now, just concentrate on the custom objects. If you click on that, then click on the plane that you've just created, you'll notice straight away that the bone has been replaced with the shape that you've just created. It's also now got a blue outline as opposed to the orange outline that you get with objects. Great. But it's not too obvious where it sort of starts, if you like. Now, what's worth bearing in mind with these kind of objects is that the head of the bone serves as the origin point on the object. So the head of the bone sort of here, if he's going to use this bone, would line up with the origin point here. So in other words, if you click on the object and move it in edit mode to the left, keep the origin point in place, you can kind of see it sliding over there as such. I'm just going to move it up a little bit there as well. So you can rotate it as well, sort of rotate it around like that if you want to kind of line it up a bit more. I might just leave it like that for now, and maybe even just move it down a little bit. So this is the thing with custom shapes, you should be doing a lot of minor tweaking with it here and there. But basically all that means now, if you click on the bone and rotate it, it basically still works. So it kind of works exactly as intended. It's not a great custom shape that I've created there, to be honest, because I've done a lot better in the past, but that's just the idea. You can basically make the custom shape however you wanted it. You could, if you really wanted to, add a Suzanne here. So let's mesh monkey. Go back to the bone and just replace the custom object with Suzanne, or Suzanne.001 as such, like that. And you can see what I mean with the orientation there as well. So if you're going to line it up, it has to be lined up like that. So if you can click on Suzanne and then rotate it around as such, like that as well. Usually, I'm just going to delete the second Suzanne there, go back to the original Suzanne and just delete that as well. And I'm going to stick it back to this object here, the plane object. You do get the option to adjust the scale of the custom object, but generally what I do is I leave the scale on, set to 1 there, but then disable scale to bone length, because sometimes like you're creating rigs, for example, but you have like certain bones using the same custom shape, but you'll find that your bones are different sizes. If they're all scaling to bone length, and all the custom shapes will scale as well. It may be what you want to do, it's entirely up to you. But generally, personally, with my own rigs, I tend to turn it off. Generally, as well, I also tend to turn on the wireframe. Generally, this just makes it a lot more obvious, to me personally anyway, that it's a bone as opposed to just another object in the scene. So again, that's up to you to decide if that's what you want to do. Generally, I also just disable the edges in the middle like that as well. And it, again, just move it around like that as such. So you get the ideas. That's what basically custom shapes are. Okay, there's just one last thing I want to mention here with custom shapes as well. Sometimes you do get problems with normals. So for example, if I was to go into top view here and just add a new plane quickly and sort of add in sort of a few new loops like that. I'm going to replace the bone here with the plane that we've just created. Okay, at the moment it all looks perfectly fine, but sometimes you'll get problems like this. You see, there's basically faces poking out here that shouldn't be there. So what generally you need to do in situations like this is basically recalculate the normals. So to do that, you just click on the object and you do it the same way as you normally would within Blender. So you click into edit mode, highlight all vertices, and then just do Shift N or Shift November to recalculate the normals. Sometimes you get a problem like this where it's all completely wireframe and it's not what you want it to do. If you go to the opposite side here, it's obviously sort of flipped the wrong way, so you can also change it to the inside here. It may be a case of there certain, like on flat planes like this, Blender struggles to calculate which ones are up and which ones are down. So you might have to go through the individual planes and like shift end them like one at a time, kind of, to try and reset them that way. It's just one of those things that you need to bear in mind in general. You can also use modifiers to create custom shapes, so you can smooth them out and do various other things with them. But the point with custom shapes is you want to keep them simple. You don't want to overcomplicate them because, one, they're not going to be seen by a user when the finished product is rendered anyway. You don't want to confuse the animator with too much information either. So I'm just going to delete that plane and I'm just going to stick it back onto the first plane here, as such. Now there's one last thing to bear in mind, speaking of rendering. If you render out this scene now, you'll see this great half circle here, this like half moon thing. The way I generally fix this is I always create a dedicated armatures layer. So if I go to the outliner, just go into here and just type in, well, create a new collection and just call it, well, we'll create a master collection first called Suzanne. Then we'll create a second collection in there, Suzanne Armature. As such, like that. And then stick the armature in there. And then within the armature, I also generally create another collection again, and I call it Custom Shapes or Suzanne Custom Shapes. This is because when I link sort of different objects or different sort of models into one big scene, you don't want like 20 collections saying Custom Shapes or 20 collections saying Armature, for example. Generally, this is just a personal preference, but I also tend to colour the armatures in red as such like that, just to make them clear. And then finally, click on the custom shape itself. Always name it as custom shape, so I usually just type in CS and call it what it is, so we'll call it the ear, for example. Move it into the custom shapes collection, and you can just disable it there by using the check mark button. But what I personally prefer to do on my own rigs is just outright disable them in the render. So if you can right click on visibility and then disable in render, and the whole collection will grey out. You can also just click on the icon there as well. I also tend to do it by right clicking, visibility, then disable in viewports. This just keeps the collection, this just keeps the outline organized, so instead of basically unchecking and rechecking and just trying to remember which ones should be checked and which ones shouldn't be, you basically know at a glance which ones have been disabled because, you know, they've been grayed out there. You don't need to guess and second guess yourself with the exclude from view layer, as it's called there. So hopefully you get the general point with the custom shapes. They're not that confusing, they're not that complicated to understand, I don't think. So I'm going to save this as Suzanne custom shape. So like I say, you can use custom shapes in a variety of different ways. A lot of people just assign them to bones. It can even just be used as like a visual reference really for control panels and things like that. That's slightly more advanced stuff, but the option is there for you at your disposal. You can also use the modifiers stack, like I say, to create modifiers, but as I mentioned before, you do want to keep your custom shapes relatively simple. You don't want to overcomplicate them, but then you don't want to make them overly simplistic either. It needs to be obvious to an animator at first glance what a bone or what custom shape should be doing, really. In the next lecture, I'm going to cover briefly the bone colours that you have at your disposal as well. Nice easy video. So I'll see you there.